Clara's tears streamed down the keys of the abandoned piano as her voice echoed through the empty room of the nursing home, causing even the nurses to pause and listen to the melody that seemed to come from another world, a song she had buried 40 years ago, now blossoming from her soul like a rare flower after an endless winter. But that was yet to come. At that moment, 62-year-old Clara Miller sat in the darkest corner of the recreation room at Meadowbrook Senior Living, watching the other elderly women play dominoes with feigned enthusiasm. The clatter of the tiles on the table deeply irritated her, as did everything about this place. She adjusted her gray shawl over her thin shoulders and sighed, feeling the familiar weight of the invisibility that had accompanied her for so long. "Mrs. Miller, why don't you join the others?" asked Mariana, a young nurse with curly hair who always tried to cheer her up with a forced smile. Clara simply shook her head, looking at her own rough hands. 40 years working as a cleaning lady in corporate offices, cleaning desks where others made important decisions, emptying trash cans full of wasted dreams. 40 years being treated like furniture, as if she were part of the decor. And now, at the end of her life, she was here, deposited by distant relatives who considered her existence an inconvenient burden. "She doesn't like to interact," murmured Yvonne, the facility coordinator, passing by with her clipboard always in hand. "Some seniors are like that, closed off, bitter. It's normal." The words cut Clara like sharp blades. Bitter. Was that what she had become? Or was that what she had always been, just an invisible woman who never mattered to anyone? She slowly rose, her joints protesting, and walked to her room, a small cubicle she shared with Mrs. Albright, a woman who talked to herself and forgot her own name. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed and opened the drawer of the nightstand. In the back, wrapped in a cloth yellowed with age, was the only object she had brought with her, a small handwritten musical score, its edges worn and some notes smudged. Her fingers trembled as she touched it. "Lullaby for Tomorrow," it was written at the top of the page, in her own youthful handwriting. The title was in English because, back then, she dreamed of composing for the whole world, of having her music played in places she only knew through magazines and television programs. She closed her eyes, and for a moment she was 22 again. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The conservatory was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Clara nervously adjusted the navy blue dress she had saved months to buy, taking a deep breath before entering the room where her audition for the pianist position in the city's symphony orchestra would take place. Her hands, then smooth and agile, trembled slightly with anxiety and anticipation. She had composed Lullaby for Tomorrow, especially for this moment. The music was born on a sleepless night, when the moonlight streamed through the window of her small apartment, and she felt as if all the sadness and hope in the world could be translated into musical notes. It was a lullaby, but also a hymn to the future, a melody that embraced melancholy without being overcome by it. "Clara Mendez?" a dry voice called. She entered the austere room, where 5 men in dark suits observed her from behind a long table. Maestro Robert Silvers, a man with a gray mustache and an eternally disinterested expression, didn't even lift his eyes from the paperwork. "You have 3 minutes, he said, checking his wristwatch. "Begin." Clara went to the black grand piano that dominated the center of the room. Her hands found the keys as if they were old friends, and the first notes of Lullaby for Tomorrow filled the room. The melody began softly, almost whispered, like an intimate confession, then grew in complex layers that told the story of a soul that dreamed, suffered, and hoped. During those 3 minutes, Clara was no longer the daughter of the seamstress who lived in the suburbs, nor the scholarship student who cleaned the conservatory in exchange for lessons. She was pure music, pure emotion transformed into sound. Her hands danced across the keyboard with an impossible precision, creating harmonies that made the very air vibrate with beauty. When the last note faded into silence, Clara opened her eyes and saw 5 perplexed expressions. For a moment, she believed she had succeeded. "Interesting," the maestro finally said. "You have technique, undoubtedly." But, he paused, looking at the other judges with a condescending smile. "Do you really think someone of your background could adapt to the refined environment of our orchestra?" His voice carried a poison disguised as politeness. "Classical music demands more than just skill. It demands culture, class. These are things that aren't learned. They're innate. Clara's world crumbled at that moment, not because of the words themselves, but because of the way they were said, with the naturalness of someone stating that the sky is blue, as if her social status were an indelible mark that made her forever unsuitable to dream. "We appreciate your participation," concluded another judge, already organizing the papers as if she were no longer there. Clara left that room a different person. The young woman who entered full of hope and music had died in those minutes of humiliating silence. In the following weeks, she put away the piano, folded the score of Lullaby for Tomorrow, and buried it in the bottom of a drawer. She got a job as a cleaning lady, justifying to herself that at least she would be useful in some way. Asterisk? 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 "Mrs. Miller, are you all right?" Mariana's voice brought her back to the present. The nurse stood in the doorway of the room, with a worried expression. "I was just remembering," Clara murmured, quickly putting away the sheet music. "Dinner will be served in half an hour. Would you like me to accompany you to the dining room?" Clara shook her head, and Mariana moved away, leaving her alone again. From outside, she could hear the city noise, cars, horns, lives going on. Inside the nursing home, everything was silence and suspended time. In the following days, an even heavier routine settled in. Clara woke up at 6 in the morning, had breakfast with tasteless bread, sat in the same chair in the recreation room, and stayed there until lunchtime. In the afternoon, it was television time, always talk shows with canned laughter or soap operas she couldn't follow. Dinner came at 6 p.m., and at 9 p.m., everyone had to be in their rooms. It was a mediocre, predictable, safe existence, and Clara hated every second of it. One Thursday afternoon, however, something broke the monotony. Mariana appeared in the recreation room, carrying a wheelchair where a woman Clara had never seen before was sitting. "Everyone, I want to introduce our new resident, Hope Davis," the nurse announced with genuine enthusiasm. She transferred from Chicago. Hope had completely white hair, tied in an elegant bun, and wore gold-rimmed glasses. But what stood out the most were her eyes, green and intense, as if they held important secrets. Despite the wheelchair, she radiated a dignity that made the other elderly women in the home seem smaller. "Pleased to meet you all," Hope said, in a melodious voice with the accent of someone who had traveled extensively. "I hope we can get along." Clara observed her for a few minutes, intrigued. There was something different about that woman, an energy that didn't match the apathetic atmosphere of the place. Hope didn't play dominoes or watch television. Instead, she spent the afternoon observing every detail of the environment, as if she were cataloging important information. The next day, during breakfast, Hope approached the table where Clara always sat alone. "May I sit here?" she asked, maneuvering the wheelchair skillfully. Clara made a vague gesture of approval without lifting her eyes from her plate. She wasn't used to talking and didn't know how to act. "You know," Hope said, slowly stirring her coffee, "there's something interesting about this place. The walls have a peculiar acoustic." Clara looked at her for the first time, frowning. "Acoustic? Yes. Have you noticed how sounds propagate here? The way a conversation in the hallway echoes to the recreation room." Hope smiled mysteriously. "Imagine if someone played the piano here. The sound would spread throughout the building." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't mentioned music to anyone at the nursing home. How did this stranger know? "There's no piano here," Clara said, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Oh, but there is," Hope replied, with a twinkle in her eyes. "In the basement, an old grand piano, covered in dust. The staff doesn't even know it exists." Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. How was it possible that a woman who had arrived just 2 days ago knew something she herself didn't know? "How did you?" "I explore," Hope said simply. "When you've lived in many places, you learn to discover the secrets each one keeps." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The image of a forgotten piano in the basement disturbed her in a way she couldn't explain. At 2 in the morning, she got up silently and walked through the dark corridors of the nursing home. She knew this kind of night walk well. She had spent decades cleaning empty buildings, navigating mazes of corridors, lit only by emergency lights. She found the basement door unlocked, as if someone had prepared it for her arrival. She descended the creaking wooden steps, guided only by the faint light coming from the high windows, and there it was, a Steinway grand piano, probably from 1950, covered with a dusty sheet. With trembling hands, Clara removed the cloth. The instrument was in perfect condition, as if someone secretly cared for it. She pressed a key. A clean, crystalline middle C echoed through the space. It was like reuniting with a lost love. She sat on the bench and without thinking, her hands found the first notes of Lullaby for Tomorrow. The melody flowed naturally, as if the 40 years of silence were just a bad dream. Her technique was rusty, of course, but the music was still there, untouched by time. I knew it, a soft voice said, behind her. Clara turned around, startled. Hope was at the bottom of the stairs, leaning on her wheelchair, smiling. "How did you get here?" Clara asked, her heart still racing. "The same service elevator you could have used," Hope replied, approaching. "But you chose the stairs." "Interesting." Clara stood up from the bench, embarrassed. "I shouldn't be here. This must be the nursing home's property, and Clara," Hope interrupted, and there was something in the way she said her name that made her stop. "How many years has it been since you played?" The question was like a punch in the stomach. Clara felt tears welling up, but she fought to hold them back. I'm not." "You are a pianist," Hope said firmly. "A composer actually, and a very good one." "I was," Clara whispered. "I was, a long time ago, but it doesn't matter anymore." "Doesn't matter?" Hope's voice carried a gentle indignation. "Clara, you just played a melody that gave me goosebumps, and you say it doesn't matter? You don't understand." Clara pulled away from the piano, as if it might burn her. "I tried. When I was young, I really tried, but I was told that people like me weren't cut out for it. That music was for those born with silver spoons, not those born with dirty hands." Hope was silent for a long moment, studying Clara's face. "And you believed them? What else could I do?" Clara's voice cracked. "I was a nobody, a seamstress's daughter, a scholarship student. They were right. They were afraid," Hope corrected. "Afraid that someone like you would prove that talent isn't bought, that genius isn't inherited, that true music comes from the soul, not the surname." Clara wiped her eyes with her sweater sleeve. "It's too late now. I'm old, forgotten. My hands don't even obey me anymore." "Your hands just played a perfect melody," Hope said, pulling her chair closer to the piano. "Besides, do you think Casals stopped playing the cello at 90 because he was old? That Horowitz abandoned the piano because his hands aged?" Hope placed her hands on the keyboard and began to play, a delicate and harmonious version of the melody Clara had just performed. But there was something more, variations Clara had never imagined, layers of complexity that transformed her simple composition into something greater. "How do you know this music?" Clara asked, speechless. "Because it's a melody worth knowing," Hope replied, stopping playing. "And because I recognize genius when I see it, even when it's buried under decades of self-deprecation." That night, Clara returned to her room in a state of shock. She lay in bed, but sleep didn't come. Instead, melodies began to bloom in her mind, variations of Lullaby for Tomorrow, harmonies she had never considered, rhythms that pulsed like a rediscovered heart. The next morning, she sought out Hope during breakfast. "Are you a musician?" she asked without preamble. "I was a music teacher for 50 years, Hope replied, buttering her bread. "I taught everyone from children in conservatories to professional musicians. I've seen a lot of talent wasted because of fear." "And why are you here?" Hope smiled sadly. "Because I grew old alone, Clara. I dedicated my whole life to the music of others and forgot to live my own. When I could no longer teach, I discovered I had built nothing but a career. No family, few friends, only students who grew up and moved on with their lives." Clara felt a strange connection with this woman. 2 lives dedicated to service, 2 stories of wasted talent, 2 invisible women at the end of their journeys. Would you teach me something? Clara asked, surprised by her own courage. Hope's eyes lit up. Clara, I'd like to do something with you, something that might seem impossible. What? I want you to play for everyone here. I want you to share your music. Clara laughed bitterly. Hope, you don't understand. I'm not good enough for that. And besides, who would want to listen to an old woman like me? Everyone, Hope said with conviction. You just need to remember who you really are. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The following weeks were a revelation. Every night, after the nursing home fell asleep, Clara and Hope met in the basement. Hope, despite her wheelchair, was a rigorous and inspiring teacher. She not only helped Clara regain her lost technique, but made her understand her own music in ways she had never imagined. Your composition has soul, Hope said one night, after listening to Clara play an expanded version of Lullaby for Tomorrow. It speaks of loss, but also of hope, of struggle, but also of peace. It's rare to find something like this. I composed it during a very confusing time in my life, Clara confessed. It was like writing a letter to my future self, and here we are. In the future, Hope said with a smile. Perhaps it's time to read that letter. Clara felt like she was being reborn. Her hands, once aching and hesitant, regained their agility and expression. Her posture straightened. Her eyes shone again. Even her way of walking through the nursing home corridors changed. She was no longer the invisible old woman who hid in the corners, but a woman who carried music within her. Mariana was the first to notice the transformation. Mrs. Miller, you're different, the nurse commented during one of the meals. More alive. Sometimes you just need to remember who you are, Clara replied, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. But not everything was easy. Yvonne, the coordinator, began to suspect the nighttime outings. Clara noticed her inquisitive glances and knew it was only a matter of time before she was discovered. The weight of guilt consumed her. She was breaking rules, lying, behaving like a rebellious teenager at 62. Hope, she said one night, while practicing a particularly difficult passage, I think we should stop this. Why? Asked Hope, who was correcting notes on a score. Because I'm deluding myself. I'm pretending to be something I'm not anymore. And if they find out, they'll think we're crazy. Hope stopped what she was doing and turned to her. Clara, do you want to know the difference between people like us and people like those judges who humiliated you 40 years ago? Clara nodded. They believe they deserve music simply for existing. We think we need to prove we deserve the right to dream. Hope took Clara's hand. But music isn't a class privilege, dear. It's a human right, and talent doesn't age, it only deepens. But what if I play for people and they don't like it? What if I disappoint everyone? What if you play and change someone's life? Hope replied, what if your music is exactly what someone needed to hear today? It was then that Clara realized her transformation wasn't just personal. In recent weeks, she'd noticed subtle changes in the nursing home. Mrs. Albright, who always talked to herself, had begun humming softly during meals. Mr. Joachim, a former factory worker who rarely spoke, asked if she knew any old music. It was as if the very energy of the place was shifting, as if people sensed something different was happening. What if, Clara thought, what if I actually tried? Asterisk. 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 The opportunity arrived unexpectedly. The nursing home was organizing a small party to celebrate its anniversary, 25 years of caring for seniors. Family members would be coming, local officials, even a councilman who would give a speech about senior care. We'll have live music, Yvonne announced during a meeting with the residents. I hired a small ensemble that will play instrumental music to create a pleasant atmosphere. Clara felt her stomach clench. Instrumental music, probably those banal arrangements of well-known standards, played without soul by musicians who were only doing it for the money. That night, in the basement, she confided in Hope, 40 years cleaning offices, and now I'm going to spend my last years listening to Muzak at a nursing home party. That's what's left of my life." Hope was silent for a moment, then said, "Clara, what if I told you that the piano in the main hall works perfectly?" "How do you know that?" "Because I asked Mariana to check it. I said she had experience with instruments and could help with the maintenance." Hope smiled mischievously. "The girl is a sweetheart. She did everything I asked." Clara felt a chill in her stomach. "What are you planning?" "Nothing," said Hope innocently. "I just think it's a shame that such a beautiful instrument remains silent during a party that should celebrate life." "Hope, no, I can't. You don't understand." Clara stood up, agitated. "I performed once in my life and it was a disaster. They humiliated me. They shattered me. I'm not going through that again." "That audition was 40 years ago," Hope said gently. "You were a scared girl trying to impress horrible people. Now you're a woman who has lived, who has suffered, who has something true to say." "What if I forget the notes? What if my hands freeze? What if you fly?" Hope interrupted. "Clara, are you listening to me? What if you fly?" Clara sat down again, her hands trembling. "I'm so afraid." "Fear is normal," Hope said. "But do you know what's worse than fear? Regret. Imagining for the rest of your life what could have been." For a moment, Clara closed her eyes and saw herself again at 22, leaving that humiliating audition. If she could go back in time, what would she say to that shattered young woman? "If I do this, if I really do this, will you be there?" "I'll be in the front row," Hope promised. Asterisk. 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 The nursing home's anniversary party was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. All week, Clara lived in a state of constant anxiety, alternating between moments of determination and panic attacks. She practiced Lullaby for Tomorrow hundreds of times, expanding the original composition with the variations Hope had suggested. The music now lasted almost 8 minutes and told a complete story, from the initial melancholy to a hopeful ending that warmed everyone's hearts. On the morning of the big day, she almost gave up. She woke up with sore hands and a head heavy with anxiety. "Hope, I can't," she said during breakfast. "My whole body is shaking." "Perfect," her friend replied calmly. "The best musicians are always nervous before performing. It means you care." "But what if Yvonne doesn't let me? What if she stops me?" "Leave Yvonne to me," Hope said, with a smile that Clara had learned to recognize. It was the smile of someone who was plotting something. The main hall was decorated with colorful balloons and celebratory banners. Tables were arranged with sweets and soft drinks, and the small makeshift stage was already set up for the musical ensemble. Clara watched everything from afar, feeling like a spy in enemy territory. The guests began to arrive around 2 o'clock. Family members who visited the elderly once a month, local officials who smiled for photos, journalists from small media outlets who would cover the event. Clara recognized some faces: grandchildren who barely talked to their grandparents, children who seemed to be fulfilling a social obligation. The musical ensemble took the stage at 3 o'clock. 3 middle-aged men with well-maintained instruments and professional expressions. They started with a bland version of Girl from Ipanema, followed by a sugary arrangement of Caring Hoso. The music filled the room like sonic wallpaper, present but soulless. Clara felt her old anger resurface. There was the music being treated as disposable entertainment, as background noise for banal conversations about the weather and health. No one was really listening. No one was being touched by those sounds. That's when she realized Hope had disappeared. 10 minutes later, Yvonne went on stage and interrupted the musicians. "Folks, I have a little surprise," she said into the microphone, with a slightly forced smile. "One of our residents, Hope Davis, approached me this morning with a very special request. She told me we have a talented pianist among us and asked permission for her to perform today." Clara felt her blood run cold. Across the room, she saw Hope discreetly wave, that mischievous glint in her eyes. Clara Miller, Yvonne continued, searching for her in the crowd. Would you grace us with a song? All eyes turned to her. Clara felt her legs weaken, her heart pound, her throat dry. It was like being 22 again, but this time the audience wasn't 5 cruel judges. They were ordinary people, seniors like her, weary family members, curious staff. I can't, she stammered. Come on, Clara, called out Mr. Jones from afar. You've always seemed to have music inside you. Other residents began to applaud encouragingly. Mrs. Albright, who rarely spoke coherently, said loudly, "She has pianist's fingers. I noticed it from day one." Clara looked at her trembling hands. Then she looked at Hope, who made an almost imperceptible gesture, a nod that said, "Now," slowly, as if walking toward her own destiny. Clara walked to the piano. The steps seemed endless. Her shaky legs barely supported her. The room fell into absolute silence, as if everyone felt that something important was about to happen. She sat on the bench, adjusted her posture, and looked at the keyboard. The keys seemed gigantic, threatening. Her mind was completely blank. "Breathe," Hope's voice said in her head. "Just breathe, and let the music flow." Clara closed her eyes, and pressed the first note. What happened next was like magic. Her hands moved over the keyboard, as if they had a life of their own, finding each note of Lullaby for Tomorrow with crystalline precision. But this time, it was different. The music carried 40 years of lived life, 40 years of pain transformed into beauty, 40 years of silence finally broken. The melody began softly and melancholically, telling the story of a child who dreamed of tomorrow. Then it grew, becoming complex and urgent, narrating a young woman's struggles against a world that didn't want her. Then, it plunged into dark and painful passages, depicting decades of resignation and invisibility. But then, miraculously, the music began to transform. The somber notes gave way to more luminous harmonies, as if pain were being alchemized into wisdom. The original melody of the lullaby returned, but now imbued with a depth that only time and suffering could bestow. As she played, Clara realized she was no longer alone. Around her, the silence was absolute, but not empty. It was a silence pregnant with emotion, of people truly listening to music for the first time in years. She saw tears streaming down the face of a woman visiting her mother, noticed one of the professional musicians stop packing up his instrument to listen. Even Yvonne, always pragmatic and hurried, was motionless, with a surprised expression on her face. But it was when Clara opened her eyes and saw the nursing home residents that she truly understood the power of the moment. Mrs. Albright was lucid for the first time in months, swaying gently to the rhythm of the music. Mr. Jones, who rarely showed emotion, had his hands clasped over his chest as if he were praying. Other elderly people, whom she saw every day apathetic in their chairs, seemed to have been reawakened to life. The music was building toward its final climax when Clara had a revelation. She wasn't just playing for those people, she was playing for the 22-year-old who had been humiliated, for all the invisible women who had spent their lives serving without being seen, for all the dreams prematurely buried by fear and prejudice. Lullaby for Tomorrow reached its highest point, a cascade of notes that seemed to sustain the very air, and then, gently, dissolved into silence. Clara kept her hands on the keys for a few more seconds, as if she didn't want to break the spell. As she played, Clara thought of all the invisible women who went through life serving without being seen. She thought of dreams buried by fear, talents wasted by prejudice, voices silenced for not fitting the expected mold, and she made a silent promise. She would use her music, her second chance, to honor all these untold stories. She would teach that it's never too late to start over,
that talent has no age, that true art is born from the soul, not from birthright. The music continued to flow, and Clara knew her true story was only beginning. The 40 years of silence hadn't been in vain. They had been the preparation for this moment, when she could finally offer the world not only her technique, but her complete humanity. And as the final notes of Renaissance echoed through the hall, Clara Miller, composer, pianist, teacher, and finally, a visible woman, smiled at the future that opened before her like a blank score, waiting to be filled with the melodies of a life finally lived to its fullest. The nursing home would never be the same, and neither would Clara.